Man. White. Heterosexual. How are privileges protected? Often invisibly.
Meritocracy is something quite extraordinary because it's the synthesis of almost all strategies for protecting privilege. It's important to know that it has a history. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It's an old story. In France, for example, in the 17th century, the aristocracy was all-powerful, but in fact, there was a policy of major public works. So there is a need for knowledge, a need for people with skills that the aristocracy does not possess. So they will go seek out skills, expertise, and individual merit outside the traditional dominant groups represented by the aristocracy. Then comes the French Revolution, and at that moment, of course, privileges are abolished and the idea of equality emerges, equality among individuals. And so this is enshrined in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. At that time, the idea was that an individual can and should succeed, should occupy a position based on merit and no longer on birth. So I emphasize man because obviously it was addressed to men, women's merit. At that time, it hadn't really been recognized yet. People didn't want to see it. If we continue through history, during the empire, an aristocracy was rebuilt, but this time based on merit, not birth. But merit is judged by the emperor. He is the one who decides what constitutes merit and who is deserving of it. But it's no longer determined by birth. And then, if we jump further ahead in time, there's a very important era, the Third Republic, because that's when, in France, with Jules Ferry, compulsory education was established. And that's the idea we have of it from that time, that people were allowed to emancipate themselves through knowledge and indeed to attain social positions through merit rather than by birth. In reality, what we don't see is that it's no longer by aristocratic birth, but rather by bourgeois birth. Because in reality, at the time of Jules Ferry, only 1% of children made it as far as the lower secondary school certificate. Middle school was fee-based and high school was fee-based. So, 99% of children went to primary school. They learned to read and write, which was becoming increasingly necessary in the society of that time. But in reality, afterwards they went back to the factory, the fields, or the mine. And then we make another leap in time, one last leap, and we arrive at the end of the 20th century in the 1970s and 1980s, and that's when education became widespread. The number of students graduating with the baccalaureate multiplied by 8 with each generation. So, here again, one might think that this allows all social classes to become emancipated, or rather, for each individual to forget their original social class and their gender, since up until then there had been a very strict limitation. We can see this during the time of the French Revolution. In reality, we see that this is not the case. It is only gradually that women will be able to study, and then, for the rest, it remains a monopoly of a social class, but one that has simply been shifted in time. That is to say, it is no longer at the time of the middle school diploma that the filter takes effect, but after the baccalaureate. Because after the baccalaureate, there is higher education or technical education or not. And that's where we find the social categories again. So the more privileged social categories with parents who are graduates, especially from elite schools, we see that they are largely overrepresented, more than overrepresented. To even consider entering ENA, you are 300 times more likely to get in if you already have a parent who is an ENA graduate. Children from less privileged social backgrounds are sometimes almost absent or even completely absent in certain fields of study. There are fields that are divided by gender, with some being more masculine, others more feminine, and there is a certain prestige and financial advantage in terms of salary and other benefits for the masculine fields compared to the feminine ones. And then we also see phenomena of privatization. There are schools that are privatized. A lot of higher education is privatized. And there, obviously, you need the means. So when you come from a lower social class, and when you are a girl, you have to face cultural determinism, which tells you, as a girl, go this way instead, rather than that way. That's the first thing. Secondly, you need the financial means to find housing, to feed yourself, and maybe even to pay for private school, if that's the case. And then there are other filters that are even more important, which are social filters, self-limitations. That is to say, it has been measured that with equal results at the time of the baccalaureate, children from lower social classes will have less ambition in their choices, in their applications. When it comes to entering higher education, they will apply less to the grandes écoles, the prestigious schools. In a way, they will limit themselves to paths that are less prestigious, less valued as well. Sometimes paths that perhaps give them the impression that they will get a salary more quickly, more directly than with other programs. So here we see that the idea of succeeding through merit, obviously, is a great illusion. Well, it's a strategy because this illusion, at the end of the 20th century, was conceived by neoliberal thinkers. There is a famous quote from Margaret Thatcher, who said, "Society does not exist." So it's the idea that there is no system, no determinism, no filter. Where there's a will, there's a way. So this illusion, as I was saying, is deliberate. It is maintained because in neoliberal political thinking, it is necessary to obviously to defend the freedom of those who are already the strongest, to remain the strongest, and to become even stronger still. And so we justify with this myth, this invention of a society in which everyone could succeed. We even we highlight a few individuals who have achieved particular success despite their social background, but who are the exception that hides the reality. And for everyone else, we justify a system of not distributing advantages, salaries, positions considered more prestigious, etc., which are monopolized by a particular social class and, overwhelmingly, by one gender. We justify this lack of distribution with the idea that, in the end, those who don't make it, since we supposedly give them every opportunity, and that's an illusion, that's where the lie is, since we supposedly give them every opportunity, it's because they simply don't want it. They don't desire it, or simply they are not competent. So we can see that all of this, obviously things have loosened up a bit. It's no longer as strict as it was during the French Revolution, at the beginning of the 20th century, and during the Third Republic. But we can see that these filters are still at work. And for women in the workplace, it's quite obvious. Because not only are there all these professional filters to get to the point where one can work, but there's also private life. And we see that today, the vast majority of parental and domestic tasks, even caring for the elderly, fall much more to women than to men. And we can see that this obviously has an impact on careers. There is absolutely no doubt about that. When a man can focus solely on his career, while a woman has to divide her time between her career, her family, and household tasks, and of course, the mental load that comes with it, in terms of professional advancement, it's not at all the same thing. And on top of that, women are made to pay twice, since it's anticipated that they'll have to spend time on these matters, and so they're given fewer professional promotions. And that's where we see that this strategy, first of all, it's very powerful because it can be very convincing when you don't have the arguments to counter it, but above all, it synthesizes a lot of different strategies. So first, there's a kind of essentialization, since it's the individual themselves who is considered to have merit or not, as if there were no influence from one's environment, social class, gender, etc. So merit is naturalized, and too bad for those who don't have it. That's the first thing. It's a way of justifying. Secondly, there's denial. They deny that there are barriers that prevent people. Obviously, this is denial. We've already seen this strategy before. But that's not all, because in reality, there are other strategies, like symmetry and inversion, that are also used. Because those who are in positions of power, who pass it down from generation to generation, these are the people, as studies show, who believe most strongly in the idea that we live in a meritocratic society. They're the ones who believe it. And of course, they have every reason to believe it. Because as soon as someone tries to change the system to bring a bit more fairness, a bit more justice, they see themselves as victims. And they say that people are attacking their skills, their ability to work, their merit, since they believe that it's only through merit that they've succeeded. So we can see that this is a strategy that brings together many different strategies. So it's very, very powerful. And of course, we can respond to it when we have the arguments to do so. I think the best argument is to say that we should move from who wants to conversely, who can wants. Because in order to want something, you have to be in a position to want it. And to be in a position to want it today, you generally have to belong to the privileged classes, to be a man, and obviously, it's only by becoming fully aware of all these aspects that we can free ourselves from meritocracy, which is both a myth and a strategy.